We already received one question from Mark Porter. How do you balance, and I think that goes out to Chris and Doug, how do you balance the challenge of maintaining employee autonomy with the often uncomfortable truth that the same data can be used to improve operational efficiency at a more granular level, is also inherently linked to individuals more explicitly? So for example, in your example of templatizing operations, how do you ensure this does not cause a reduction in autonomy for employees? Or in the previous camera example from Chris, the feeling that my individual performance could be monitored. So I guess, Doug, maybe you can go first, and then Chris, you can go second.
Yeah, well, first off, Mark, thank you for such thoughtful questions. I think those are the right questions to ask, so I appreciate you asking them. I guess let me bring up the question. Oh, it's answered. Cool.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
You moved it on me. So I guess by starting from an autonomy standpoint, I think the overall, for team members to feel that they have autonomy, you obviously can't structure their job too much. And so I'll give you a good example is cabin cleaning. So a lot of the missions that Springshot supports for cleaning involve maybe one or two tasks. The tasks typically are based on the section of the aircraft being cleaned. So we may have a 5-person crew cleans an aircraft. Maybe someone is responsible for the flight deck and the lavatories. Someone has the galleys, and then the other 3 team members have the seats. And so the task will be clean this section of the aircraft. It isn't clean seat 1, seat 2, seat 3, right? And they don't see tasks that say perform 8 different requirements on that seat. A lot of this is in training before. So when they come to the aircraft, they already know what they need to do. They obviously can use the platform to see if they have questions, specifically what the requirements are. But the goal is you cannot make the team member feel like they're a data collector. I think when mobile technology first sprung on the scene a decade ago, a lot of it was, let's just rush to digital. Let's put flip phones or PDAs, right, in the team members' hands, and let's have them complete lists. It cannot feel like you're collecting data. And so what's critical is the structure, again, try to minimize the tasks. And then to further the sense of autonomy, there's a whole, as Amber and I chatted previously, there's a whole field of study around job crafting. And so someone may have the title of cabin cleaner, but they may feel that it's their responsibility to report maintenance issues, right? Which is somewhat responsible, cabin cleaner may be somewhat responsible for that, but that's not their job. But if you provide in the workflow, the ability to, as they go, to quickly snap a photo and quickly tag a broken armrest, right? Or broken tray table, stuff that's not a no-fly item, but these are things that sometimes don't get caught in the logbook. So they're really helpful, but they're things where the cleaner can feel like, I'm crafting my job. I have the autonomy to do more. And I am a maintenance, reporter of items. And so I think the key for autonomy, again, is they can't feel like they're data collectors. You've got to minimize it. And you absolutely have to have an interface that is simple to use, right? There can't be this disconnect between the human and the device that, oh, what's it telling me? And this is a pain to interact with. People need to want to feel the desire to interact with that device and provide data. So I think I at least touched on a part of that. Christian, I'll kick it to you on the data side.
Yeah, thanks. I think excellent question. And maybe before I had sort of 3 things that pop into my mind when I heard the question, but maybe before mentioning them, I think what's interesting that there's also a very big cultural aspect to this. For example, in some Southeast Asian cultures, measuring performance is the most normal thing there is. In any job you will go in Singapore, individuals' performance will be measured, will be publicly displayed versus their peers. And that's something that in some Western cultures is not normal at all, and you won't find there. So first of all, I think you have to have a sort of a cultural sensitive approach to this. But then I think to the topic of autonomy, so the first thing that came into my mind is, I think that's also the way how you introduce something like this, because as long as you involve the people, for example, to create the template, then it might not feel as forced upon them as if you just go, this is the template and this is what you need to do. So as long as you keep the overarching goal in mind and involve the people how to get to this goal, I think you can even make something that is probably quite structured feel as something that they're a part of and something that they want to be part of, especially if you look to these younger generations that Doug also presented. Second thing, obviously, this is maybe a bit of a no-brainer, but I would say don't punish but reward. Individual performance measurements that lead to punishment will not be very popular. Obviously, I guess if you're going to reward people for proper behavior, they're going to have much less trouble with, being monitored on an individual level. And then the third thing, I don't necessarily even think you need to address people on an individual level. Like if you show, like obviously you want to be able to show people's performance, but you can do it on a shift size, team size kind of groups, right? So there's an optimum, because if you go too big, people say it doesn't matter what I do, I don't see the response of whatever I'm doing in the data or in the results. But if you go to the individual, that might even be too small. So I guess the trick is also here to find the optimum level where people don't necessarily feel chased individually, but still have an idea that, I can see my team is doing well. So those are just, I think, 3 things how we can kind of address that topic. I hope that was
real quick. If I could pick up, Christian, on something you shared there, I think, Mark, what's critical is there are different feedback mechanisms. And from a motivation standpoint, if you've got team members that are already intrinsically motivated to do something, don't stack rank them. That's going to deprive them of the autonomy and the joy of doing what they do, right? So studies have showed time and time again that some of the worst feedback systems are ones where you stack rank people. Most famously, Jack Welch in differentiation. If you have 100 people and there's a contest and one person wins, studies show, this probably won't be that off when I say it, but studies show that the most disappointed person isn't number 100. They don't care. It's number 2. The last thing you want to do, right, is, to Christian's point, is to disincentivize the individual. So use different feedback systems, badges, XP. Those all work really nice when people are already intrinsically driven to do something. But when it's something where you have to drive an extrinsic reinforcement, Christian's right. Even in Western cultures, you may need to stack rank and display performance individual versus individual, but really try to use that sparingly, because it's just been shown not the best motivator long term.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Looking at the amount of questions we're getting in, I would like to move on. Mark, I hope your question has been answered now. Next question is coming from Jim Robinson. He asks if there has been a global index or scorecard been established or will be established so airport management can measure their success over time in achieving sustainability goals, e.g. zero carbon.
Okay, I'll pick up on that one if I may. Thanks for the question, Jim. It's a good one. There's a couple of scorecards around at the moment. So as part of the ACI Airport Carbon Accreditation Programme, there's a tool which is free for airports to download called ACERT, which allows you to measure the emissions and the targets around at airports. And that's proved very popular, and that gets consolidated into all the ACI reporting. Or the other alternative is to look at ISO 14001, which a lot of airports have adopted, which is the international standard for environmental management systems. And that works on targets, goals, and very much on the plan, do, check, act process around continuing improvement. And what's nice about that particularly is it looks at the environmental aspects and impacts. So what you do on a daily basis and what the potential impacts of that are going to be, and it ties into things like risk and opportunity as well. So I hope that answers that question. It's a very quick answer.
Thanks a lot, Amber. Brilliant. So the next question is coming from Charlie Pryor. What percentage of aviation CO2 emissions and other pollution be reduced on the ground? The other way of looking at it is what can realistically be done while we still have ICEs and kerosene? I guess that goes a little bit in your direction again, Amber.
Yeah. Hi, Charlie. Nice to hear from you. It's a big question, and I don't have an immediate answer to it, to be honest. I think a lot of it will depend in which part of the world you're in. So up in the Nordic regions, they've already done a huge amount around reducing emissions on the ground. When you start to look a little bit more globally around things like integrated and intermodal travel systems, you're starting to see big shifts and changings coming through there. I think one of the interesting areas is going to be when you start to look at things like the electrification of aircraft and looking at implementing energy grids into airports, but that's a much bigger infrastructure change. So I think there are opportunities there, but there are provisions that it depends very much on the maturity, the level of adoption, any government or climate corporate taxes. I think there's 64 separate carbon taxes around at the moment, according to the World Bank report. So that will drive changes and shifts as well. So I can't quite answer in terms of a percentage, but there is going to be, I think, a lot that can be done. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you. The next one goes, the next one is from Sugandhi Jayaraman. How far, and I think, Chris, that goes a bit into your direction, how far are we from integrating a CDM type solution into all ground handling operations so as to ensure energy efficiency and sustainability? Are there examples of something similar being already implemented at any airport?
Excellent question. And it's a topic that we're actually pushing quite heavily for. And it's a bit of a cat and mouse situation, or chicken and egg situation, because the anticipated benefits are actually quite significant. However, all the airports, which would be the initiative takers, are kind of looking for the evidence to invest in these kinds of initiatives. So on our side, we are actively lobbying with airports, also with institutions like Eurocontrol, in order to try and get to a point where we can actually start proving these effects to kind of break the chicken and egg problem. I also think that European Horizon 2020 subsidized projects would typically be a good instrument to basically enable these kinds of initiatives that will then show the benefits, that will kind of kickstart and create the market for these kind of solutions. So to your question, I don't think it's being done today just yet. I think there's a lot of ideas, concepts, visions around it. We know there's a lot of airports looking into it, considering it. So I think we're pretty close, and it's pretty similar patterns that we've seen with other kinds of, these kinds of developments. So I think one of these days there will be a way where, we'll find a way to get one of these initiatives done. And once the data is there to prove, what kind of benefits will flow from it, I do honestly believe that will sort of kickstart and create a market for these kind of solutions and add-ons to the existing ACDM framework.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And maybe just one sentence. I was part of a IATA working group over the last half year, where we also tried to get into a kind of data standard for aircraft ground handling or turnaround operations. So to create a standard messaging for different stakeholders to exchange information about a ground handling process, but also to define standard denominations and standard terms for ground handling. So to collect them all, that at one stage, and that is maybe the first stage, and then the second or third stage would be to already create like an industry-wide norm or standard for an aircraft turnaround. But thanks, really good question. Next one is Craig Schiller. Recognizing we are talking about an important and immediate means to emissions reduction, what would you want to say to airlines and nations to accelerate the other roughly 90% of aviation's decarbonization? I guess that goes back to Amber.
It's a great question. I think one of the answers is going to be get on with it. You're starting to see at the moment shipping taking great action with some amazing sort of net zero commitments from some of the big shipping companies. You're starting to see power, oil, heavy industries decarbonizing. So if aviation doesn't shift a little bit quicker, suddenly that 2.5% that it represents at the moment of global emissions is going to seem a lot higher as other industries are decarbonizing. So I think one of the key things is going to be look at this as a global industry challenge and really buckle down on the information sharing, looking at that bigger picture and really working together to try and address some of the challenges, particularly as we see this green recovery in this response. And you're starting to see already some of the green recovery requirements from airlines. I've got government stipulations that there must be some environmental aspects put in there. So pay attention.
All right. Nice, thanks.
If I can maybe add one thing to this, I think there are several studies coming out that's also showing paths. How can the aviation industry basically achieve the goals of net zero emissions in 2050. But what I think is very important is that there's sort of a weight portfolio of initiatives, right? Because it's very easy to say in 32 or in 20 to 30 years, we believe there will be electric flight, or there will be other, still quite uncertain technologies that will mature, and they will give massive improvements. If it all pans out that way, that's great. But I think we'll need to look at the topic and have short-term initiatives as well as long-term initiatives with a spread risk portfolio, a spread time portfolio, where you start doing things today that already make sense, as well as plan for initiatives further down the line as those kind of technologies mature.
Yeah, and I think especially looking at Doug's part and Dan's part in the end, there's technology that can help to factually reduce waste and reduce CO2 emissions, like Christian shared, in making turnarounds more efficient and make everyone do the right thing at the right time. But I think also from this whole nudging perspective, it's immediately available, whereas sustainable aviation fuels, for example, will only be widely available in, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. So I fully agree with you, Chris, that we should have this kind of bouquet of flowers with all different kind of possibilities to reduce. Every single percentage point helps in the end. So Craig, thanks a lot for this great question. There's two more questions. Looking at the time, I would say let's go through them quickly. For everyone else, thanks a lot. If you have other questions, please feel free. Piotr, can you go to the next slide? Please feel free to contact the participants directly. So this question is from Andy Gregg, and I think, Doug, that also goes a little bit into your direction, and maybe Dan, I don't know. Aviation is a complex system with a large number of interrelated but independent external variables. By breaking jobs down into choreographed task lists, you run the risk of removing personal autonomy and hence personal motivation, but also remove the necessary variability to get the task done. If tasks are too prescriptive, there isn't the flexibility to deal with unexpected external constraints. How do you balance this with the use of data to make task flow more efficient?
Jan, want me to start?
Yep.
Cool. Andy, thank you so much. Great question. And thank you for thinking along these lines. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's finding the balance, right? And the difficulty is we have to structure it somewhat, because you can't have at the aircraft turn a bunch of freelancers. Like, the last thing you want is catering to say, I'll show up whenever I want. The ramp guys, I'll get out there to the aircraft whenever I want. So, for good or bad, there needs to be some structure there. I don't think aviation could exist, airport ops could exist without that. But you're absolutely right as to where do we find the balance. And so when we've partnered with initial companies that have moved to digital transformation, they take the approach often that you're nervous about, right? They want to structure the heck out of everything. Like in the ramp context, it could be, I need to know the time that the bagroom personnel first leaves, they meet the aircraft. I need to say that there are 4 runs out to the bin, and it needs to happen at what time. So what could happen is a mission where my job really is to just make sure the bags get offloaded by a certain point, turns into 10 tasks. I'm pulling out my phone, marking that things are done. You're right that is terrible. And so what you really want to do is find the balance. And from a structure standpoint, make sure you establish the minimally required structure points, so that you'll have the structure you need to make sure everything runs on time, but providing the team members with the flexibility to craft their job. And so using this same example, maybe the ramp team members found a way to do the run or to get the offload done with 2 runs, right? Maybe there's something they want to do in the break room to prepare, so they leave 2 minutes after everyone thought for them to meet the initial or do the initial takeoff. You want to provide the team member with the flexibility to document things they found on a FOD walk, things found on arrival on the aircraft, to document a block out, things that you may want to put structure on, structure their mission so they get all these data points. But the last thing you want to do is do that. You want to give them the autonomy to find those things on their own, but again, make sure that they follow the minimal structure critical path forward. So very, very, very good question. It's something we all need to be mindful of. You take it the other way, it breaks down the whole system.
Thank you, Doug.
And I'll just add to that. I think there's a clear differentiation here between goals and tasks, or objectives and tasks. So I think being too prescriptive about a task is not the right way to go here. I think setting goals allows that autonomy in order to get to that objective. There are always going to be circumstances where behaviors can't be enacted. There might be ice on the runway. There might be a need for, in the case of pilots, for instance, where they just cannot enact a certain fuel efficiency behavior for safety or geographical or inclement weather or whatever reasons. So with that in mind, I think the first thing is that from our perspective, the data has to take consideration of that and provide the recipient the ability to question the feedback or say, hey, I wasn't able to do this because of A, B, and C. And just making sure that that feedback loop is two-way so that the user is already building part of the feedback for their own personal experience, and making sure that it's goals and not tasks. The tasks can be suggestions rather than orders. Then I think that allows for the autonomy and makes it more fun as well.
Thank you, Dan. Both with the D. All right, then the last question of today, and this goes out to you, Amber, from Vivekanandan. Sorry for mispronouncing that one. This is a specific question to Amber. We are focusing on sustainability and showing level of effort required to achieve long-term targets. What about other side of the equation? How to show an airport is less vulnerable to climate risk?
Thanks. This is a great question. I actually love this because we talk a lot about the impact of aviation on climate change, but what about the impact of climate change on aviation? And it's a very good point to raise. So when you consider changes in temperature, extreme changes, you look at changes in weather pattern, much more forceful winds, which if you happen to be flying are going to make it a lot more turbulent. And I think there was a great report from NASA, not so great if you're a passenger, but it was talking about the increase in passenger related claims for injuries related to turbulence. These are all things you need to consider. At the actual airport level, I think one of the biggest key elements to consider is a really good risk assessment for climate change. So are you in an area where you're likely to have rising sea levels or rising groundwater that might then come up and flood your runways more regularly? Do you need to look at extreme heat and therefore look at smart cooling panels for the airport? Do you look at when and where you put your AC on based on where the sun is? Do you look at potentially having cross-running runways so you can avoid changes in crosswinds? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done if you are running an airport around considering those climate risks. And it can come through as well to do your critical systems. Do you have good backups? Do you have enough power if something goes down? How do you keep people maintained to the airport? There's all sorts of things to consider. But again, I'm a big fan of ISO 14001. And one of the things it looks at is risks associated with climate. So that would be one of the key parts, is to really look at your environmental impacts aspects and apply it to the climate in which your airport is operating. And then to start having some kind of longer term views, working with meteorological societies, and really starting to understand what some of those impacts could be. And being forewarned is being forearmed.
Brilliant. And I guess on these great words, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amber, Doug, Christian, Dan. I think it was a really good webinar. We learned a lot today again. Thank you, everyone, for participating. It was great to have you here. I saw that in the end, Przemek made it to the webinar again, so you still keep the 100% record. I love that. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening or a good day. And yeah, see you again next month.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.